Hello and welcome to our workshop here to stay on resisting gentrification and fighting back. If you are joining us just now, welcome. This is the third attempt. If you've been here the whole time, third time's the charm. We are very excited, committed, and determined to go through this workshop with you all. My name is Zohran Mamdani. I am the Democratic nominee for Assembly District 36 in Northwest Queens. I am joined here by Marcela Mitaynes, who is another incoming Democrat to the New York State Legislature from Sunset Park. And then after the two of us have a conversation, we're going to be introducing you to the real stars of the show, which are the organizations that actually do the work of resisting gentrification, fighting back, and winning these kinds of victories to keep people in their homes. We have Minquan, we have CASA, we have Drum, we have Stop Sunnyside Yards. So basically, wherever you are in New York City, there's a place for you and a way for you to get involved. So I'll kick this off as long as our technical difficulties are behind us. I will be introducing Marcela. Marcela, what's going on?
Hey, Zoran, good to see you. Glad to be here with everyone.
So, Marcela, I'm going to ask you a question and then I'm going to throw myself on mute just so we can fight back against these technical difficulties. Marcela, so given that tonight is about gentrification, fighting back against it, can you give us a definition so everybody knows exactly what we're working with here?
Yes. So gentrification means the change and improvement of a community or a neighborhood based on the fact that there are new higher income earners coming into the community.
Great. And tonight, what we're going to be talking about between the two of us is our experiences in understanding and fighting back against the system that allows for that, incentivizes it, and accelerates that displacement, and then turning it over to the organizations who have specific fights right now going on in that area. So one thing I wanted to just highlight before getting into, Marcela, the housing work that you do is just to highlight that gentrification as a system is something that works in very close connection with a host of other kind of areas that we might not consider as part of gentrification. So typically we think of gentrification, we think of housing, but there's also ways in which it is interconnected and facilitated by education, by transit, by policing. And so specifically, I wanted to bring up two examples with regards to policing, just to give people an idea of how these two things are very much tied together. So in a study from 2009 to 2015 here in New York City, looking at neighborhoods that were prime candidates to be gentrified, meaning that there were a lot of low-income residents and lack of recent housing construction, what was found was that neighborhoods that experienced real estate reinvestment were more likely to see intensified misdemeanor policing than those that did not. So what that means is as the property values increased, as we had higher income tenants coming in, displacing lower income tenants, the police then increased order maintenance arrests for things like loitering and disorderly conduct, and also increased patrols and proactive arrests for things like drug possession and driving while intoxicated. The second example I just wanted to give to give people an idea of this is with the recent case of the murder of Breonna Taylor. So Breonna Taylor's family, the lawyers that represent them, allege that the raid that led to the killing of Breonna Taylor was part of a broader effort to evict residents who were stopping the city's Vision Russell redevelopment initiative. So what that means is that in Louisville, there is a redevelopment process called Vision Russell, where the city is trying to do what is called like a renewal project. And the police who actually busted into Breonna Taylor's apartment were apparently seeking to apprehend an associate of her former boyfriend. And the reason why, according to Breonna Taylor's family's lawyers, is because her former boyfriend lived in a home that they wanted to repossess for the purpose of gentrification. And a few months after her murder, the city did actually purchase that home for $1. So I bring up those examples just to give people an idea of how this process of mass displacement, this process of eviction, these are things that are facilitated by a whole host of different systems that are run by the state, including the police forces across this country. So with that, I wanted to bring it back to housing. And Marcela, I wanted to ask you how you got into this work in the first place.
Yeah, so I grew up in Sunset Park, a predominantly immigrant working class community. And in 2006, I was having my own housing insecurities. There's a landlord that purchased the 35-unit rent stabilized building that I was living in and had been living in with my family for over 30 years, and suddenly was able to displace half of the families in the building within 6 months. That really led me to wanting to understand what was happening, why so many of my neighbors were being displaced, why wasn't anybody noticing, why wasn't this sending red flags, and really coming to work with a community organization that does tenant advocacy, and really understanding what gentrification was, how it was impacting the community, but also the laws that currently existed that allowed for tenants to easily get displaced, and how, how all of that really impacted the housing. But what about you, Zohran? How did you get into this housing work?
I got into housing work because I got involved with local campaigns, first in Bay Ridge for someone named Khader El Yatim, ran for city council in 2017. And one of the core pledges of that campaign was about not taking any money from real estate developers. And it was one of the first time that that had been popularized in city council races in New York City. And then from there, I worked on another campaign, which was centered on that issue of rejecting developer dollars and prioritizing the voices of tenants who are being displaced in the neighborhood. And after I did that work, I wanted to get involved directly with people going through that kind of work and helping them fight back against it. And I became a foreclosure prevention counselor with Chaya CDC. And I worked with low to middle income homeowners of color across Queens. And one thing that that experience taught me was the ways in which gentrification does not simply impact renters across our city, but also has the ability to force out homeowners as well, because of the different ways in which we have so many cash poor homeowners who feel the effects of rising costs in the neighborhoods that they call home. Marcela, I wanted to ask you, because along with being a kick-ass housing organizer and an incoming legislator that give people joy and excitement and inspiration, you were also part and parcel of the effort to defeat the industry city rezoning that just took place, that was attempted to take place in Sunset Park. And I wanted to ask you about that, and how did that campaign go? What were some successful tactics, and what kind of reflections do you have from it?
Yeah, it was a long fight that we're happy that it's over. We were able to get the developer to pull his rezoning project. I mean, I feel like it really started in 2013 when we found out that they purchased the property, and understanding the way the real estate works, how they buy a property and they kind of like just evict people and raise rents. Understanding that there was garment manufacturing down there, that there was art studios, understanding the long-lasting impact of what this could mean. We were slowly starting to see real estate really using the idea of Industry City and what was being proposed as a way to incentivize people to come into our community and really start buying a property. And so we really started just focusing on the immediate area or the perimeter around the property, and really trying to talk to folks and educate them, but really understanding the housing issues that they were having, and really starting to make the connections to them on why it was happening and how it wasn't an isolated incident. There's a great community organization, Uprose, that really took the lead in wanting to bring the community together to have larger conversations about what was happening. And that really inspired a lot of folks in the community to get involved, and different advocacy groups started popping up, really wanting to do the work. And it's been really great to see us work in coalition. And I really think that it took something as simple as just having conversations with your neighbors, in simple ways of explaining what was happening. People knew, were already feeling the displacement pressures. The thing was really connecting it to what was spurring it. And it's been, it's been an incredible journey. We weren't sure what was going to happen. Like most groups, we were focused on plan A and then working on plan B, if things didn't go through. But I think the pandemic really highlighted the issues that working class people were having, and the fact that we were able to then really reach across the borough, across the city, to other groups and other residents that had already gone through the gentrification and were able to see the displacement, but groups that were also starting their own fights and really making it a larger fight against the city about what was happening, particularly because these projects and these proposals were all done prior to the pandemic. And it just didn't make any sense why they wouldn't adjust it for the changes and really try and plan for it. But why don't you tell me about Amazon? I know you guys were very inspiring out there.
I can tell you very briefly about Amazon for sure. You know, we did a lot of different kinds of tactics with Amazon. I'm a proud member of Queens DSA, and through my membership of Queens DSA, as well as with Empower Change, there were a bunch of actions I was a part of. There was a town hall that Queens DSA and others put together here in Astoria, where we had hundreds of people come to a church to speak about the issues that Amazon really was about to bring to the fore. We had, we canvassed all across Astoria and Long Island City. And what was really exciting about that is typically in elections, you only canvass registered voters for the election. But when you're canvassing around an issue, you canvass everyone. And what's really great about that is that it finally shows you the true breadth of the community. In addition to that, I was part of an action that shut down an Amazon bookstore in Midtown. And we really tried to do a full court press around every single thing. And there were monthly meetings of all kinds of community groups to come together to figure out what tactics we would all do and what ways we could all help the fight against Jeff Bezos, his helipad, and giving them hundreds of millions of dollars from public grant money. Given that we're about to become elected officials, we're both going to get really good at taking up all the time and not giving any credit and time to organizers themselves. So I want to make sure we don't do that since we haven't been sworn in yet. But we have a couple minutes before we pass it over. And Marcela, I wanted to ask you, typically people think of gentrification in the sense of its symptoms, when they see people moving into a neighborhood, when they see rents going up. But looking past that, thinking about the policies that actually allow for that, incentivize that, what are some of the short-term goals that you have in Albany to fight back against gentrification?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, the biggest concern most folks have is, how are they going to pay the rent? So there's three really important bills that we're trying to push. And one of them is the eviction moratorium, where there should be no court cases at all moving forward until at least the end of the pandemic and then sometime after that. We're also looking at a cancellation of rent and mortgages. So rent not just for residential units, but commercial units as well. And really understanding that we have small-time property owners that really depend on the income from their renters to pay their mortgages. And we want to make sure that we're protecting them as well. And the last thing is providing a rental subsidy at the state level. We know that there are rental subsidies at the federal and city level, but the truth is they're also very outdated. And so adding additional support at the state level would be helpful. So right now, those are the three bills we're focusing on. And we're also going to be doing a lot of actions, and particularly October 1st is a big one, right? That's the day when we pay rent. There's a huge mobilization across New York. And what we're doing in New York City in particularly is we're gonna have a rally and a march at 11 a.m. at Foley Square. The longer this continues, the more and more our working class folks are struggling. Some people are back at work, but we're talking about people being back to work 1 or 2 days a week. We're talking about a large immigrant population that is not getting any type of assistance or service, or they don't qualify for the assistance that's available. So there's a lot of people that are really in need. And we think that this is one of the basic things that we can do to kind of bring some stability as we continue to kind of like bring the economy back.
Absolutely. And I think it's really great for everyone to understand that this is not something we have to simply sit by passively and experience. This is something we can fight back against through protests, through organizing, through mobilizing, and a whole host of different fronts. And Marcela has spoken about the three short-term goals in terms of bills for right now that fight gentrification in the course of this pandemic. In the long term, we also are all very passionate about good cause eviction, which is a bill that would provide the framework for universal rent control across New York State. Right now, 50% of tenants in Queens, which is where I am right now, are market rate tenants. And that means they do not have protections from landlords, whether it means a guarantee for a lease renewal or how much the lease will change after its end in terms of how much they'll be charged for rent. And these are the kinds of pieces of legislation that fight back against displacement by creating a long-term sense of sustainability and also safety for our neighborhoods. So when we talk about fighting for quality of life, fighting for safety, it also means the implementation of these kinds of bills. Marcela, it has been a pleasure, as always, talking to you and kicking off this workshop with you. I am now going to switch it to the next part of the workshop. And unlike our typical workshops, or Team AOCs, I'm out here putting myself in the group. This today is a little bit different, not only because we had 3 attempts before we kicked it off, but also because instead of one person presenting a PowerPoint slide, we are actually going to have it be multiple people going through different issues and anti-gentrification work that different organizations have been doing, the campaigns they've been working on, and the strategies they use to win. So we have pulled together some, and when I say we, I mean the organizers in Team AOC, have pulled together some resources on ULERP, which if it's a word you don't understand, don't worry, it's going to be explained over the course of the workshop. And you can find these resources at ocasio-cortez.com/here to stay. So again, that's ocasio-cortez.com/here to stay. And that link will provide you with resources on how you can organize against gentrification, the systems which allow for it, expedite it, and accelerate it in your own neighborhood. Now I am very excited to introduce our first organization of the night, which is Minh Quan Center, which has been serving, educating, and organizing low-income Korean and Asian communities in Queens since 1984. That is 7 years before I was even born. And we will have 2 speakers from Minh Quan tonight. There is Sunye Pyun, a long-term resident of Flushing, the lead housing organizer at Minh Quan Center, and a member of the Flushing Anti-Displacement Alliance, also known as FADA. Sunye is fighting with a diverse community in Flushing for housing rights and against the predatory racist rezoning. And then we also have Bobby Nathan, who is a long-term Flushing resident, volunteer at La Jornada Food Pantry, and attends the historic St. George's Church in Flushing. Bobby has been organizing Flushing tenants to empower us since 2015. Sunye and Bobby, I will hand it over to you. It has been a pleasure being the participants before you, and I wish you the best.
Thank you. Hi, we're very excited to be part of this workshop. Thank you so much for hosting us, Team AOC. We are fighting against the special Flushing Waterfront District rezoning in Flushing, Queens, New York. And downtown Flushing is a working class neighborhood. A lot of immigrants and from diverse backgrounds live here. In fact, when we do outreach, we have to do it in Spanish, Korean, Mandarin, and English. However, developers have been planning to gentrify our neighborhood for 20 years, and this Flushing rezoning is one of their major plans. On that note, I would like to share a brief timeline of rezoning and gentrification. In 2010, the late Queensborough President Claire Schuman's Flushing Willets Point Corona Local Development Corporation, also known as FWCLDC, received $1.5 million from New York State Brownfield Opportunity Area, or BOA, planning grant. In 2014, that corporation transferred $800,000 of that money to Department of City Planning to prepare this rezoning for private developers. So in response to that, Flushing community got together, organized, and fought back, and the rezoning plan was stopped in 2016, but the developers came back with the essentially same plan in December 2019. This rezoning is 11 block mega development. The site is 29 acre big along the Flushing Creek waterfront, and they are planning on building 1725 luxury condos and 3 hotel buildings. Those buildings are above a FAA height restriction, which means that it will endanger our community members. Flushing is also fifth largest business district in New York City and already struggling with overcrowdedness and congestions in downtown. Bus travels at average speed of 3 miles per hour. Our schools are 120% overcrowded. Being said, adding 4,000 people would be a disaster. In 2014, Mayor de Blasio announced that he wants to rezone Flushing since that predatory landlord had bought dozens of rent-stabilized buildings, displacing our low-income tenants by taking advantage of their limited English proficiency. And they also don't fix repair issues for long-term tenants to kick them out, renovate them, and increase the rent. Also, we have been fighting against, first, skyrocketing rents, second, predatory landlord, speculation of land. According to New York Times, Flushing quietly became one of the fastest growing for sale markets of the last decades. Third, we lost a lot of small businesses and supermarkets. People who work at those small businesses, obviously they lost their jobs too. When those businesses were closed, big franchise business came in. This also means that people have to pay more money for the same kind of services. Lastly, when gentrification happens, cleaning the street happens as part of their broken window theory. So homeless people, sex workers, street vendors, delivery workers were harassed and targeted more by the police. Now I'm gonna turn it to Bobby Nathan to share how we do research and outreach to fight back.
Hi, I'm Bobby. I live in Flushing for the past 40 years. I grew up here. And so I volunteer as a tenant organizer. And so when they did the rezoning, they didn't say anything to us. They didn't reach out to us, neither Community Board 7, the city, nor the developers. They didn't reach out to Minquan, to the church, or any tenant groups here in Flushing. And so we found out about the rezoning on YIMBY, which is YIMBY, which is a great site, on December 16th, 2019, at around 10 o'clock when I came in the office. And I found out about it, and it was like, wow. So to me, it's like, it's important that you do research, because a lot of the times it's like they don't tell you what they're doing. And unless you check their website, such as YIMBY, such as therealdeal.com, it tells you what they're buying and selling all over the United States. So you just put in like your neighborhood into YIMBY or into Real Deal, and it will tell you like what's for sale and what they're buying and who is buying it. Another thing we like to do is to read the newspaper, like the news articles, because we notice, especially in the New York Post, it's like they'll tell you this is the next upcoming neighborhood. They'll start featuring like the restaurants and stuff. And so it'll tell you like, this is gonna be the next hot spot. And so when they do buy the buildings, what we do is we check the Department of Finance to see exactly who is signing the deed on these paperwork. Because sometimes they use like a lot of LLCs and you don't know who the real developers are. So we check the deed to make sure we know who is buying these things. Also, when you go to the Department of Finance, it also tells you who's the bank that's financing these development, or I call them the underdevelopment here. And it's important because if you start noticing, it's the same bank that's pushing us out of our neighborhood. And then what I do sometimes is I go to like the Department of Buildings to check if they have permits out, and then to go to HPD and see exactly what the complaints on the building as well, and to make sure that they register the building properly. And then from there, I go to like just fix it. So it's who owns what, just fix it. And it tells you like the other buildings they own. That's like important because a lot of times they doing the same thing in every building. In some, like for example, Treetop had bought 8 buildings, 7 here in downtown Flushing and 1 in Jackson Heights. And so what we did was we went to Make the Road New York in Jackson Heights, and we asked them to organize that 1 building in in Jackson Heights, and we organized the 7th building here in downtown Flushing. So it's important to make sure you check what they own. To do outreach, what we did here in Flushing is like, because as Sunny said, we have like 4 languages, so it's kind of hard. So we have to print up flyers like in 4 languages, and we have like discussion with the tenants, and so we bring them to like the church, or we bring them to Minquan, or we use space in the library here on Main Street, and we tell people know their rights. We also put like flyers under the door to tell them about who the landlord is and what they did in other neighborhoods. We tell people like when the hearing date is coming up and like other information on the hearing. We also realize that because a lot of people here are like immigrants and they don't know their rights, we also make sure we tell them this is your right. And if you need an attorney, Minquan has an attorney. And so we also do like phone banking here with the young people. And we have like what I call the Power Rangers here, the young people here at Minquan. And we do door knocking, so we go into the buildings and we tell the people what their rights are and what's coming up here in Flushing. So right now we're fighting with 2 groups here in Flushing that's fighting the gentrification. So it's the Fed Up group and it's the Father group, and they do outreach on the streets here in Flushing. We also reach out to the churches here in Flushing because we realize like a lot of people here, they go to churches here, and it's easier for the ministers to tell their people what's going on. Another thing I started doing in 2015 was I started a walking tour, because I was like showing the kids at Queens College how gentrification worked, but they didn't see it up and close. So I would take them into the buildings and show them the constructions and stuff. And then last year, Professor Ham, myself, and Sunny, we actually started a walking tour and started including other people in the neighborhood to show them like the displacement, show them the new buildings, show them like the displacement that's going on all over. We also took Queens Board President Sharon Lee on a walking tour after the BP airing about the rezoning here, and we actually showed her all these hotels. We showed her 25 hotels in downtown Flushing. We also showed her the NYCHA building, showed her how F&T was like building right next to other buildings, and the tenants were suffering from like rats, roaches, a lot of dust. And we showed them that this is like environmental racism. We also showed them where the new buildings are going to be built, and it's right next to to 2 cement factories and 2 asphalt factories.
Thank you, Bobby. I would like to do a quick update on the Flushing rezoning ULA process and what we have been doing. Since last December, we have been fighting every battle, participating in every hearing, mobilizing dozens of people. We had the first hearing at Queens Community Board 7 in February. And we found that at least two of the CB7 members got paid by the developers, and they voted obviously yes. And despite that, we had rallies in front of the CB7 hearing location with unions and other stakeholders. Second hearing was voter presence hearing in February. She voted no. We had the press conference in front of the Borough Hall with elected officials. We're at the 3rd stage, which is City Planning Commission's hearing. And we had a few days before, we had rallies and marched down to Peter Ku's office to tell him to vote no and demanded to stop virtual hearing because according to Comptroller's office, 41% of Flushing families do not have internet access, but they were having this hearing on Zoom. This was really frustrating because they were having luxury hearings like Tea Party while there are 10,000 people lined up at the local food pantry in Flushing, and tenants were forced to collect bottles on the street to survive. And also coalitions, and we are also suing the city too because we didn't have environmental impact study and there was no community engagement in the process, in the planning process. For the next steps, we want to build more alliance with more unions and faith leaders in Flushing and across the city. We also want to do more outreach to engage more community members. So our knowledge, what we just said, would become the public knowledge. And to find more info and to volunteer, you can sign up your email at Minkwon, M-I-N as in Nancy, K-W-O-N. And also please sign up our petition at FADA. And you can find FADA's petition at act.fight4flushing.com. Thank you. Right now, next up, we have folks from Stop Sunnyside Yard, a grassroots coalition fighting against the Sunnyside Yard project. From Sunnyside Yard, we have Emily Sharp, a Sunnyside resident of 22 years and the founder and lead organizer for the coalition. Emily is also an attorney who works executively with low-income clients to protect their benefits.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you, Team AOC, for having us and letting us have the opportunity to explain to people how we became a group and how we're building, a coalition across Queens and the city. So I want to tell you tonight about some tactics, and I also want to tell you about how we started. So for those who don't know, Sunnyside Yards Project, I first heard about it in 2015. Our mayor de Blasio said he wanted to create new land over the busiest rail yard in the country. It's 180 acres, it's huge. And he wants to build land to bring 30,000 new residents on top of the 60,000 who are already here or plan to come in another newly created luxury gentrified area, which is Long Island City. So that was his plan, but the governor was against it. And de Blasio would always say, oh, it's not gonna happen for 10 to 20 years. Don't worry about it. This is a tactic they use. Don't worry about it. It's not gonna happen for a long time. So we kind of forgot about it while he, for the next 3 years, was having a feasibility study commissioned. So he could find out that it's feasible to put a 70-story tower in our neighborhood of 6-story buildings. And it's gonna be 3 stories above the street. And then he hired an architect to form a steering committee, and he, they sold it to the public on October 2018 was the first meeting. So with that first meeting, I was like, oh, I have to definitely start a coalition of neighbors to stop this. And I'd thought about it in the past, but they kept putting us off, and we thought it wasn't gonna happen. So now it's really gonna happen. So what I did was I made I had some contacts in the neighborhood from like meetings that I've gone to, some acquaintances who had started their own groups that were successful. So I called them up because I'd been to their meetings and I liked what they're doing to fight gentrification. So I said, would you mind guiding me, give me some advice? And they were really helpful. So that was the first thing. And then I wrote a newsletter. It was kind of like a petition, but it was longer. But it laid out all the reasons why it would be bad for the neighborhood in Queens to have this project. So I did that and I sent it around to everybody I knew. And then I asked them, please forward this to your friends. And in the meantime, then I started working on having a meeting, the first meeting, which was about 6 weeks later. And I had 4 guest speakers come, and I wanted to, they spoke about gentrification and other projects in the city, things like that. And I wanted to have guest speakers because, that would lend credibility to my group. People didn't know me, as there's people that didn't know me, but they knew the speaker, so that would draw them in. So then in the meantime, before the meeting, I worked on, got to create a logo and a name, a website, what else? Twitter, all these things. We made a flyer to hand out at the meeting. So this is all stuff to build your coalition and let the community know. The most difficult part for the meeting, and this probably is a little different now with coronavirus and now that everybody's switched to web and online stuff, but you still want to have events in person. But anyway, so it took about 10 tries to find a place. And actually I just happened to be talking to my neighbor, and he said, he's an 80-year-old gentleman, and he said, you can use my synagogue and it'll be for cheap, it'll be for a donation, small donation. So we're like, okay, yes. So that's where we had it. And we're able to make the money back because a lot of times people don't have a budget, which we don't. And so we just passed the hat at the meeting and we were able to get the money back. in that way. So that was that. And then at the meeting, I also, to build the coalition, I had sign-in sheets, and I asked everybody for their contact information. And I said, please mark on the sheet with, if you'd like to help in research, if you'd like to help do writing op-eds, what would you like to do? So that was the meeting, and it went really well. And then since then, we've been really trying to grow the coalition within the neighborhood, like I said, citywide and borough-wide. The more, say more people you have, the more power you have as well. So, word of mouth, social media, showing up at people's events, sharing research with other groups, flyering with other groups, those are all ways to build your coalition. And some tactics, I want to just talk about some tactics we've used. There's a lot of things you can do, and they will change throughout your process. We're a year and a half in, and I know Sunset Park just finished a 7-year battle. So, things change as you go through the process. And it's good to be flexible and change whenever you need to. Some of the best things, and Bobby actually touched on this definitely, is research. You have to do your research, and you find out so much in it's like opposition research. You look at all of, Wall Street Journal, The Real Deal, all these papers and media that's where they know all the stuff about the developers. But you have to know what is happening. The feasibility I talked about, I read that. It was 200 plus pages. I went through it with a critical eye. I didn't skip over to just read the conclusion. I made sure there's a lot of jargon, financial jargon, engineering terms that I had no idea. So I just looked it up online. You can Google stuff and you're like, oh, that's what that means. And you have to maybe go down a rabbit hole for a bit and figure out what they're talking about. But a lot of times they will just lay out what they're doing in plain sight. And it's just up to you to get through the muck, what they're trying to cover it up, like with flowery language or jargon. So, but a lot of times it's just right out there, the stuff that you can use to your advantage. Also, you want to research the key players, get to know them. A lot of times they write books, op-eds. You can learn so much about them and their intentions. And so when they say, we're going to do X, you're like, okay, that means you want Y. You know exactly what they're thinking. Very important, the research. Okay. Events. We've held events. We've had 9 large events so far in the 1.5 years. It's important to have a variety of events so that you can have a different group of people. Not everybody likes to do the same thing. So we always make it family friendly so everybody can come. We, again, pass the hat. We don't have a budget, but we're always able to make the money back or pay for the event. We've handed out, events. Okay, I just want to tell you some events we have had. We also sponsored a walking tour around the rail yards and the surrounding area with a local historian to show the absurdity of the project, how big it is and crazy. We held a trivia contest at a local bar to learn about the feasibility study in a fun way because it's really technical, so this made it a lot easier. We showed the documentary Battle for Brooklyn, which everybody should watch. We showed that at a local bar, and you can see how developers act in other big rezonings. We met with some urban studies students from Toronto who had a similar project coming to Canada called Quayside. They were able to stop it. We made a banner and we marched in the St. Pat's Parade. We co-hosted a rally and a virtual People's Town Hall recently. So those are all things we're doing for events, and every event is an opportunity for outreach and getting more members and building coalitions. So just some things we did for outreach. We always want to create a website and a social presence, social media presence. And you always want to be talking about your project and what's happening in your neighborhood. And you want to make sure that, I just talk about it all the time. People probably get tired of it, but I always have a flyer in my bag and I give it to people, and I'm ready, I'm prepared to take their contact information if they want to learn more about it. And that's just always an opportunity. Outreach, again, high traffic areas, flyering, farmers markets, the subway and the bus stops. We've gone door to door, talking to people in their homes and businesses, co-sponsored rallies, show up at community board meetings, make announcements. So that's all stuff for community outreach. We've done a couple of direct actions, but we haven't done that many yet. We co-hosted a huge rally with other Queens groups, and we ask the steering committee for the Sunnyside Yards to step down, the members to step down. I just want to say quickly, the ULIP process for this may not happen ever. This project is so big that it's irresistible for the politicians to just let it go through ULIP and let the city take control. So it might just go through a public benefits corporation. A nonprofit would be formed, and then a public benefits corporation would be formed. And so basically it takes it out of our hands, and will not know what's going on. And the city council member won't have a say in it either. So we want to really, we want to stop that. Basically, we want to stop that from happening. That's our next step. So that's where we are. And so please, if you want to get involved, all of these Queens groups seems like we're all working together now. So if you connect with one of us, you'll connect with all of us, basically. But StopSunnysideYards.com is a website, and then we're on Twitter, and then at Gmail, StopSunnysideYards@gmail.com is our email. So with that, I'm going to announce the next group, which is Community Action for Safe Apartments, or CASA. This is a grassroots member-led organization in the Bronx, building power to fight displacement, stop evictions and gentrification through tenant organizing and leadership development. From CASA, we have Pablo Esteban, the deputy director, and Anita Long, a volunteer leader with CASA. Anita is a lifelong resident of New York. Yay. Past 3 years, she has been fighting alongside CASA and the Housing Justice for All, fighting for a homes guarantee. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Team AOC, for hosting us. I'm just going to go ahead and dive into what happened in the Bronx on the Jerome Avenue corridor. The history of the Bronx is rooted in a legacy of systemic racism, from the government-sanctioned redlining to continued historical disinvestment. These policies created the conditions that led to the Bronx burning in the 1970s and 80s. Nearly 80% of the Bronx burnt down. But from the ashes, people organized and built back the Bronx, some with their bare hands and sweat. The history of the Bronx is also about its people. Black and brown communities that stayed, that demonstrated resilience, that kept believing, the faith and ability to keep rising despite forces meant to hold them back. And a community that wanted to stay and not be displaced or gentrified. When Mayor de Blasio announced his plan to begin rezoning across New York City, it was exclusively in communities of color. To us, rezoning are forced on communities. Rezoning allows developers to see opportunity, in other words, the ability to profit and make money, in neighborhoods that have historically been underfunded. The city says to developers, come, build here, and realize the neighborhood potential. Come help us gentrify the neighborhoods. And they use the leverage of rezoning to finally invest and pour millions into the neighborhoods that are seen as blighted. Jerome Avenue was never blighted. It was always thriving, block after block. The elevated 4 subway line rattles overhead, and down below, there was a diverse array of neighborhood mom and pop shops, like the auto body shops, unique cultural restaurants, barbershops, botanicas, poultry slaughterhouses, churches, and mosques. For many years, these small businesses, owned by the Bronxites, provided a pathway to a strong working middle class. The city's plan to rezone was about changing how the land is going to be used. To turn Jerome Avenue corridor from commercial to allow for the construction of new residential buildings under the guise of providing affordable housing, to a borough where half its residents are already rent burdened. According to the city's mandatory inclusionary housing policy passed by de Blasio, 78% of our own community residents would be excluded from applying to the 20% of affordable housing set aside. So our members at CASA said, yes, we deserve quality education. We deserve new schools. Yes, we deserve paved streets, new parks, and green space. But we want to live here. We don't want to be displaced. We know the city's rezoning plan was never about us or keeping us here. Now, ULURP, what is ULURP? ULURP is Uniform Land Use Review Process. ULURP is the process the city engages in to ensure neighborhood rezonings are reviewed by the city's elected officials and the public. There are two phases of ULURP, the before ULURP and the during ULURP. The key moment to organize and where you can shape or influence the process is before ULURP starts. Once the city proposes the rezoning and you find out, you must take immediate action, organize, do outreach, and come up with a campaign plan. Their digital next plan holds public meetings, analysis info, and will be on a community. Assesses impact. It holds a
Hey, Anita, we're having technical difficulties.
draft scope.
I'm going to jump in, Anita. We're losing you a little bit. Hi, everyone. This is Pablo from CASA. Thanks to Team AOC for having us here. And to continue where Anita was talking, so to pick up, after the rezoning was proposed by the city of Jerome Avenue, the Department of City Planning next has public meetings. They analyze information and they form a proposal about the rezoning, right? They have a plan for the community. Next, DCP looks into what the impacts of a rezoning will be on a community, which is the next phase that you'll see on this as part of the slide. It's the draft environmental impact statement, and they hold a scope hearing. So this is really the city's way of showing that they're doing an environment study, that they're taking, the different concerns of how many more people are moving in, what's the infrastructure, how will that impact people being displaced in the community. And so in the Jerome Avenue rezoning, we saw the Department of City Planning release their statement, and they said that there would be no real displacement, that by the indicators that they used to conduct that study, less than 500 community members would be displaced. And the thing about Anita was highlighting is the key moments before ULURP, because after ULURP kicks in, it triggers 200 up to 215 days. And then there are now two phases, as you'll see, the voting phase and implementation. Once you get here, that plan is moving forward, right? Well, you can influence this, maybe some of the details, like how much housing is set aside, like how many parks or how many millions the community will actually get. And so you'll see the community board, the first part of the phase is this is where community boards come into play. They hold a public hearing within the 60 days of ULURP kicking in. They hear from the public. They make a final recommendation. In our case, community boards 4 and 5, they voted for the rezoning, but they outlined a set of conditions, right? But just so you all know, community boards have no power over rezoning. That power really lies alone with the council members, who from the beginning kind of have signed off and told the city, we want a rezoning, right? And that was the case in Jerome Avenue, as our council members had already been discussing a rezoning. Next, after the community board, it goes to the borough president. It's optional. In our case, Ruben Diaz Jr. held the hearing, the public hearing. We came out with our Bronx Coalition for Community Vision, which is a coalition made up of CASA, Northwest Bronx, and an alliance with labor unions, as well as faith leaders and the small businesses that really have been thrived and have historically been on the Jerome Avenue corridor. Again, that was put through, and then it's really one last part, right? City council. City council votes on it. And in our case, council members were still for it. We're pressuring them really hard. We actually showed up on, they rescheduled the city council vote on us twice. And then they held it on a day where it was snowing, but we still showed out and we still interrupted it, knowing that, you know, we were going to be thrown out and that the vote was going to go through. And then just, you know, to kind of close out our section, that is where the power of rezonings, as y'all heard in Flushing with Sunnyside Yards, they're massive. We're not talking about one neighborhood. Our rezoning was going to impact 300,000 people, which is bigger than some cities like St. Louis and Pittsburgh. So the rezoning impact is massive, right? And it impacts everything from businesses to quality of schools, who lives there, how police interact with the community members. And so that's why it was really important for us to form a broad coalition with all these different alliances, because that way we have power. As CASA, us shouting, being like, no, we don't want this, the city can ignore you. But when you have a broad alliance with different multi-issues coming together, that's more powerful. That's something that they cannot ignore. And, you know, I don't really have too many tactics to outline other than folks already kind of covered around the necessity of outreach. But what we did was we formed our own vision and our own plan. So after, like you heard from other folks, we were never invited. We were never part of the, you know, stakeholders. So we created our coalition, and we went through a 6-month process from March to October 2015. We did outreach. We knocked on over 6,500 doors in the community. We talked to over 300 businesses in our community. We held monthly coalition meetings where we really asked our members, if a rezoning were to go through, what would it actually look like in which it doesn't displace anyone? What's our vision? So we spent 6 months engaging over 1,500 community members to come up with our platform. And from then on, like, our position was all of our platform or no rezoning, right? You can't just, you have to pass right to council, you have to protect workers. The workers that build the new buildings have to have prevailing wage and good union jobs. And those jobs have to go to the local community. There has to be some kind of provision to make sure that community members can get the work. And yeah, I think the last thing I would add was one of the most powerful things about the campaign was that the city doesn't do outreach to the community, right? Like y'all heard from Bobby, you have to go look for that information. Otherwise, you don't know. And if it exists, you might not be able to participate because of language or because of technology. But in our case, we did outreach for solid weeks. And on March 5th, 2015 is when we launched our coalition, and we had this town hall. And I remember on the day of, it was a blizzard. We were, as y'all know with organizing, you don't call off events, you just go through. So we were all phone banking. And to our amazement, we still had 500 people come out that night. And that to us showed just how much the community cared and, you know, wanted to have a voice in the process and what their community looked like. So those are some of the lessons y'all will see on the website that you can go through our toolkit of how we organize a campaign. And to close us out, we have Desi's Rising Up and Moving, or DRUM. DRUM was founded in 2000 to build the power of South Asian and Indo-Caribbean low-wage immigrant workers, youth, and families to win economic and educational justice and civil and immigrant rights. So please help me welcome Naysar Brian, who's a leader at DRUM and a current Queens resident.
Thank you, Pablo, and thank you, Team AOC, for hosting us. Good evening, everyone. My name is Naysar Brian. and I'm a leader of the drum. This is Rising Up and Moving. As a drum member, I was active in our fight to stop Amazon from building their headquarters in Queens. For immigrant workers, Amazon would have really hurt working class communities and our ability to sustain paying rent when prices are already high. I pay 65% of my income towards rent. For immigrant workers in New York City, it is common that more than half their income goes to rent and still live in crowded and poor quality housing. The jobs Amazon promised would not have gone to immigrant or working class communities. They would have gone to people from already privileged economic classes, while our lives would have gotten even harder. The technology and programming training programs they offered were nothing. And we have seen how corporations offered those programs to make it look like they are trying. As immigrant workers in Queens, we knew our neighborhoods would face even worse gentrification. We did actions outside an Amazon office in Manhattan, at the proposed headquarters 2 site, for media and in our own neighborhoods to talk to our neighbors and community members and encourage them to make calls to elected or come to events. In Drum, we also worked a lot with our own ethnic media because there was not accurate information being provided. There were lies being told that everyone would get high-paying jobs at headquarters 2. We held town halls with other organizations where we spoke about how we struggled to survive and Amazon would only make things worse, and build relationship with each other so we can fight stronger together and so we can understand how each of our communities are impacted in different but similar ways. We targeted city council members, but mainly New York State elected since they held power to block the plans. All of this made enough mess that Amazon decided to pull out of their plans. Working people, and especially working class and immigrant people, with the richest corporation in the world. We see now the housing crisis because the system cares about profit, not about people. Hundreds of thousands will be facing eviction soon. For most of us, there is no way to make up income lost. Many immigrant communities have been excluded from the stimulus and from unemployment benefits. Many small businesses will not survive, which means not only lost job for us, but also that big box corporations will come in their place. We need to cancel rent. We need housing for all. We need taxes on the rich. We need to fund excluded. We need economic development for human needs and development. All of that only happens when we as people come together, get organized, and fight back. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. If you would like to download and print a resource kit we put together to help you get started on organizing against gentrification, please go to ocasio-cortez.com/here to stay. OCASIOCORTEZHERETOSTAY. Saying once again, OCASIOCORTEZHERETOSTAY. Thank you so much to Zohran Mamdani, Marcela Mitaynes for hosting today. Thank you to Stop Sunnyside Years, Mincon Center, and CASA, as well as Drum for speaking and putting together this workshop. And finally, thank you to all of you for your time tonight and tuning in on a busy Wednesday. Goodbye.